class in this series, ongoing series we've had for quite a few weeks now on the practice of going for refuge. So I've been away as well for a few weeks. So I'm back for this last class. And then next week we're starting a new series in which we'll be moving on to the next meditation in the stages of the path to enlightenment. So we're spending quite a few weeks on each meditation so that we can really go in depth on these main meditations that make up what we call the stages of the path to enlightenment. So the meditation that comes after refuge, which is the one we've been looking at, is the meditation on karma. So it starts next week. But tonight we're going to be looking at emptiness. We're going to be looking at what is actually constitutes ultimate refuge. The thing that finally we are going for refuge in, according to the Buddhist path. So essentially, be prepared for a little bit of a deep dive into a very profound topic on the ultimate nature of reality, no less. But let's start just a little bit of meditation to help us settle our minds and set a good intention and prepare us for what we're going to be looking at. So please begin by sitting comfortably with your back straight but relaxed. We can turn our attention to our breathing. Becoming aware of the sensations of the breath as we gently inhale and exhale through our nostrils. So we become aware of the breath as we breathe naturally, normally. And then we simply keep our mind on those sensations moment by moment. Just allow yourself to let go of all other thoughts, all other concerns, so that your mind becomes still. Just the breath, pervading your awareness, moment by moment. Keep bringing your mind back to the breath. Just allow yourself to abide with the breath, moment by moment, so that naturally your mind becomes more still, more centered. Keep bringing your awareness back to the breath. And if your mind feels a little bit more peaceful, a little bit more calm, we gently shift our focus from the breath to the experience of inner peace and calm. Just simply allowing ourselves to abide with that peaceful feeling. Not thinking about it, simply experiencing that peaceful feeling, enjoying it, moment by moment, letting it fill your mind. as we gently abide with this good feeling, we can recognize that this peaceful feeling is arising naturally from within our mind. We are tuning in to a natural source of peace and happiness that is always there. You can also recognize that by simply paying attention to this peaceful quality in our heart, it naturally expands, filling our mind, indicating that our present peace is our potential for great peace, a vast peace. We are tuning into our Buddha nature, our potential for a lasting peace and freedom. A vast, pervasive joy. How amazing. Whatever level this resonates with you, recognize this is my extraordinary potential and rejoice in that as you abide with it. So we can recognize I have this extraordinary potential. For as long as my mind remains in the grip of delusions, the distorted, unpeaceful minds, such as anger, desirous attachment, ignorance, I will never be able to actualize my potential. So let's take a little bit of time to investigate this practically through contemplation. Because how wonderful if we could eradicate the source of suffering from our mind, actualizing our own potential and putting ourselves in a position to free others from their suffering. So we can each bring to mind perhaps something fairly recent in our life that caused us some difficulty, some frustration, or some unhappiness. So what would that be for you? So we can bring the situation to mind and then in particular ask ourselves, how am I perceiving myself within that situation? For example, are you perceiving yourself as relating to your potential? Peaceful, flexible, confident? Or is there a very tight, limited version of yourself appearing to your mind? Feeling overwhelmed, or anxious, or however the case may be. How are you appearing to your mind in that moment? And you can ask yourself, is this self that I'm relating to right now, is this who I wish to be? Wouldn't it be great if that insecure self, inhibited self, limited self, overwhelmed self could just disappear? And I could be peaceful, flexible, confident. Does that correspond to your own wish? So if you do have the wish to be free from that painful self, then why can't you just drop it, not identify with that painful self, just let it go? Because in that moment, we grasp at ourself. We grasp at the self that we are perceiving as being our truth, We think, I am angry, I am unhappy, I am overwhelmed. We think this is our truth. We think that that self that we are perceiving is our reality. But as Buddha makes so clear to us, that self that we normally perceive is not our reality. If we understood the reality of that self, we would not identify with it at all. We would be free from that limitation. We would always be able to respond to anything with a peaceful, flexible, confident, skillful mind. Wouldn't that be wonderful if we could do that for our own sake and for the sake of others? If we could go for refuge to the true nature of ourself. So just reflect on this, and if a wish to accomplish this arises in your heart, hold that wish. This is what we're going to be exploring tonight, how to do that. Okay, thank you very much. Let's gently relax our concentration there. I'm going to just begin by reading a little bit from How to Solve Our Human Problems. Right at the end of the section that I very often quote from, page 42, 43. where Venerable Geshe-la says, moreover, painful feelings can only arise and remain in our mind because of our present self-grasping. If we examine our mind carefully while we are experiencing painful emotions, we will discover that these feelings are invariably mixed with self-grasping. In particular, it is our grasping at an inherently existent I and mine that makes us suffer. The feelings of hurt are inseparably bound up with grasping at I and mine. We strongly feel I am hurt, or my feelings are hurt. The intensity of our suffering is in direct proportion to the intensity of our self-grasping. We cannot immediately stop self-grasping, but if we stand back from the problem just enough to glimpse how self-grasping is creating the problem, the strength of our self-grasping is undermined. So this is really just following on from what we explored together in meditation at the end, where I had you conjure up some recent difficult situation, and then I asked you to look at the self that you are relating to in that moment. So, for example, as Geshe-la's saying here, I am hurt, my feelings are hurt, I am hurt, there's a hurt self, or if someone's criticized you or something like that, or let you down in some way, then you relate to a self that is appearing very vividly to your mind as a hurt self, as an overwhelmed self in some way or another. This whole process, when you sort of break it down, you slow it right down, and you begin to just examine it, just look at what's going on in your mind, which of course is what we're about here. This is the slow it all down and look at what's going on in your mind, center. That's what we do, isn't it? Try to actually see. What's actually going on is that there is an appearance of a self. There's like an overwhelmed self appearing, or a frustrated self, or a, strongly desirous self, or whatever it may be, appearing to your mind. And we immediately believe that self to be our truth. Now, we were just establishing at the beginning of the meditation that there's a natural source of peace and happiness in our heart when you stop focusing on the agitated thoughts, and we established that actually if you hang out with that peaceful, happy self, it's going to get bigger, it's going to expand. So you can actually go ahead and think, I have a limitless potential. I am, in fact, limitless potential. That's also true, isn't it? It's true. I am limitless potential. So let's say you're thinking, I am limitless potential, and then someone comes up to you and says, I don't like you, or whatever it is that they say. I may have a limitless potential, but I'm not very good on my insults. I'm thinking, I don't like you, or whatever. Then what happens? One moment we're like blissful, like, oh, I have a limitless potential. I can be peaceful, happy all the time, free of anger all the time, free of unhappiness. I don't like you. What? So it's like we leave the land of limitless potential. We leave the relationship to the limitless mind, don't we? And we go to that little image of a overwhelmed, freaked out self. It's like we go from limitless potential mind to overwhelmed, freaked out mind. And we grasp at that one as our truth. So the self is appearing to our mind at that moment in association with some kind of painful minds. And we are grasping at it as being true, or as Geshe-la just said, grasping at it as being inherently existent. So that's a little bit of a jargony phrase, inherently existent, but it's a very important one, because we're not recognizing that we have freedom always in how to identify ourselves. I can identify with limitless potential, or I can identify with limitation. But I have freedom. And there are many different potentials I could be identifying with at any given moment, and there are many different limitations I could be identifying with at any given moment. Like, for example, sometimes you'll suddenly remember something from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and you'll identify with it. Do you know what I mean? Even though it's very, very long time and really has nothing much to do with what we're up to at the moment, it's like we suddenly go, oh, I know, I'm going to suddenly remember something from the past that made me feel very insecure, and I'm going to be that person again for a little while. And we don't realize that we're creating it. Our mind is creating all these different selves, isn't it? But in the moment that the self appears, it appears to be inherently existent, meaning not created by the mind, but existing from its own side. You see the difference? Actually, you're just creating it with your mind, all these different alternative selves, but in the moment that the self appears, it appears to be existing independently of the mind. And we don't recognize that appearance of the self existing independently of the mind is a mistaken appearance. It's a deceptive appearance. It's not true. We're actually creating the limited self, but it appears to us as if it exists from its own side, as if it's our real self. And what our mind of ignorance, which we also call the self-grasping mind, what that mind of ignorance does is it simply believes it. It believes the limited version of ourself to be the truth. And so even though a few seconds before we were thinking, I am limitless, forgotten. Now, grasping at this hurt self, insecure self, overwhelmed self, grasping. That's why we call it, you're not grasping. When we say self-grasping, it doesn't mean grasping at the self. It means grasping at self-existence, inherent existence. Because we have self-grasping at everything. We have self-grasping at the microphone. We have self-grasping at the Kadampa Meditation Center in New York City. We have self-grasping at anything. More on that in a moment. But so we grasp at that self, and then what do? That's like the first mistake. That's why we call it the root delusion. Self-grasping ignorance is the root delusion. We grasp at ourself as being independently existent, and then immediately we double down on the mistake. Why? Because we're inside ignorance. So almost nothing we do at this point is going to take us somewhere beneficial. So we're grasping at this now insecure self or hurt self, and we're grasping at the self as being inherently existent. So immediately you feel quite isolated in that self. You feel separate from others, especially when you're angry or hurt or insecure, And so immediately another form of ignorance arises because you're feeling very vulnerable, basically. And so immediately you cherish the self that you are relating to. You cherish it as the most important thing. Like if you consider at any given moment how much is going on, like for example, how much is going on in our society right now, how much suffering is going on in our society globally, but just in our country is going on at any given moment, especially right now, because it's kind of unprecedented scales of suffering taking place. For example, wildfires in California, obviously sickness, pandemic, joblessness, economic catastrophe, and so forth. All this is going on. And meanwhile, someone comes along and says, I don't like you. And, one moment you could be passionately engaged in wanting to change the system, change society, and then someone comes along and says, I don't like you, and all of that goes out of your mind. In fact, you go out of your mind and you focus on one thing, don't you? Your pain. You cherish, we call that self-cherishing. You cherish the self that you've just hallucinated with your mind of ignorance. You cherish that self as being the most important thing. The happiness and the unhappiness of that self, more important than anything else. And then what do? Well, like I said, we're not off to a good start here. So on the basis of misapprehending how the self exists, now cherishing that self, that one self that doesn't even relate to you, actually. It's not actually you. It's just a mistaken version of you. You're cherishing that self as being more important than anybody else in the universe. And you now need to defend that self. So how do we defend a hallucinated self that we see as being more important than anybody else? With further hallucinations. In other words, with other delusions, anger, jealousy, deluded pride. Oh, no, I'm really special. You might think I'm not special, but I'm special. Or desirous attachment. I really need this. The fact that you've made me feel insecure has made me feel very hungry. I need to eat something unhealthy. That'll make me feel better. Or whatever the case may be, It's like in the movies, whenever they're confronted with a little bit of a stressful situation, they immediately light up a cigarette and down a drink, And it's like, good move. That's gonna help. So that's what Geshe Kelsang is saying. Whenever there's unhappiness, you can find there's an unhappy self that you're grasping at. And that's actually the root delusion. Okay, here we go. So just so you know, I'm not inventing all this. If I did, I would be very clever. So, it is our ignorance of the real or ultimate nature of phenomena that causes us to grasp at self of persons. In dependence upon self-grasping of phenomena, we conceive or imagine an I and grasp at it as inherently existent. So we're conceiving or imagining an I, a self, and grasping at it as inherently existent, meaning we're believing it to exist independently of the mind. So by the way, that's something that we do all the time. We have self-grasping at everything all the time. Whatever appears to our mind, we automatically believe it to exist independently of the mind. The example I always use is me. Me for you. I'm appearing to you to be, Kara Morton sitting out here, separate from your mind. You feel like you're looking at Kara Morton, or you're looking at an image of me on your computer or screen, whatever you're looking at. And you're just naturally believing that I'm independent of your mind, even though each one of you is actually perceiving me uniquely, independence upon your mind. You're all looking at your own personal image of me. I'm not outside your mind. But our ignorance grasps at me as existing outside of your mind. We grasp at the center as existing outside of our mind. We grasp at New York City as existing outside of our mind. Even though clearly everyone has a different view of New York City. Where is New York City? Where is it? Can you point to New York City? Can you point to anything? If I'm confusing you, by the way, then I'm doing my job. Because we're looking at the ultimate nature of reality. And tonight we just have one class on the ultimate nature of reality. But it turns out we're about to start a whole long series on the ultimate nature of reality, emptiness, as explained in this book, How to Transform Your Life. There's an amazing chapter, quite a long chapter, on emptiness in the Ultimate Bodhicitta chapter. Excuse me. And for whatever reason, I thought, let's go through the whole chapter, step by step, on the Sunday morning classes. Sunday morning classes, isn't it? Yeah. We have a bunch of new series starting out, and they're all amazing on the different classes. But yeah, I thought, because right now there are many of you actually tuning in. Maybe some of you have a little bit more time to tune in, and just the fact that you can tune in means that more people are tuning in, just in general, through the live streams. And I think that it's up to you, of course, but it gives us an opportunity to maybe just go a little bit in depth on some of these topics. So I thought we would take a bit of time to really explore emptiness in depth. Because in truth, if you really want to understand emptiness, as opposed to just getting a little smattering here and a little smattering there by coming to the occasional class here and there, if you really want to understand it so that it begins to impact you and inform how you relate to phenomena, and in particular how you relate to yourself, then we will need at some point to spend some time with the topic, thinking about it quite deeply, exploring it, meditating on it. So that's why I thought an ongoing series, it would take a few months, going through this topic would be very beneficial. Anyway, so that opportunity is there. So where were we? So we grasp at ourself as inherently existent, independent of the mind. In dependence upon it, we then discriminate between self and others. So I'm grasping at myself as inherently self, and I'm looking at you, and you're all other. I'm self, you're other. And I think I'm inherently self. Like, who's the self in this room? And by room, I mean the virtual room, as well as the actual room. Who's the self here? And it's interesting, isn't it? Because from our own perspective, we think it's, I'm going to say me, but I mean your me, right? For me, it's my me. For you, it's your me. And at the same time, we're astute enough to be able to recognize, well, I guess everyone is the self here, right? Everyone is identifying with self. True? So who's the other here? I'm not an other than to you, right? But in the normal flow of interactions and situations, we just grasp at ourselves. I'm self, you're other. And because of discriminating between self and other, and because those discriminations are associated with ignorance, we grasp at ourselves as I'm the self, and you're all the others. And sadly, in dependence upon that mistaken discrimination, we then develop self-cherishing, as I already explained, cherishing that self as being more important than other. Boy, it's so bonkers. When you slow it down and take a look, it's crazy. But we believe self is more important than other. My happiness and my suffering is more important than your happiness and your suffering. The things to do with me, also like my family, my friends, they're more important than your family, your friends. We just naturally elevate self above other. And that's self-cherishing. All coming from that underlying root misapprehension of self-grasping. Self-grasping gives rise to self-cherishing. And then we generate self-cherishing. With self-cherishing, whenever we behold what is attractive, we develop desirous attachment. So if I see something that's attractive and I allow myself to dwell on it, I'm going to develop desirous attachment. I'm going to want it. I'm going to crave it. It's attractive to me. I'm important, so it's important I get what I want. It's not that important that you get what you want. I mean, that would be great, but do you know what I mean? It doesn't have the same emotional intensity that it does for us. I mean, like I already said, there is so much suffering that we read about. Terrible suffering. People having it just now, for example, on the West Coast, having had their houses and everything they own and so forth just gone up in flames. The whole towns have burnt up, and we can just read that, can't we? We can just read that. Oh, that's not good. But it has, unless we pause and really reflect on it, it's very easy for it to not have much impact. And especially, we've become quite accustomed to seeing, these terrible statistics of how many people have died. One of the senior students here who's a nurse, I spoke to her the other day, and she was telling me how, especially in the early days of the pandemic, that she had never seen people die in such distress. She said, in all the years, she's been a nurse for many, many years, I've seen many, many people die, but she said, I've never seen anything like it. Not only because of the respiratory quality, the gasping for breath, but also dying in complete isolation. Nobody touching them, nobody other than somebody in a hazmat suit, No ability to connect to their family. Why am I bringing this up? Only just to note how powerful our self-cherishing is. That it can just, because we all have also a good heart, a loving heart, a kind heart, a compassionate heart. We hear a little bit, stories of people suffering, it touches us. Our heart opens up, we want to help, but it's so quickly derailed, isn't it? By just a strange look, or somebody walking a little bit slowly in front of us, and suddenly we find ourselves in the grip of self-cherishing. What about me? I'm important. Yeah. So, all the other delusions arise from self-cherishing, anger, jealousy, greed, attachment. Independence upon that, we engage in deluded actions. Independence upon that, we create the contaminated karma. The karma that is of the actions that are associated with delusions, we call that contaminated actions. We're going to be looking much more at karma, obviously, in the next series. Contaminated actions, seeds of suffering. So the seeds of our own future suffering have been sown due to our delusions, due to our self-cherishing, due to our self-grasping. So that's what's creating a series of experiences, ongoing experiences, that are difficult, painful for us. And how do we respond to those? With self-grasping, with self-cherishing, with more delusions. And so we've set in motion what Buddha called cyclic existence. Samsara, that's the Sanskrit word, samsara, which just means cyclic existence. It actually means just circle. We're trapped in a cycle where we're constantly wanting happiness, but because of our ignorance and self-cherishing and so forth, the delusions, we keep creating suffering, to which we respond with further delusions, and round and round and round we spin, trapped, seeking happiness, but because of the ignorance of self-grasping, creating suffering. So once we destroy self-grasping ignorance, we will destroy all our delusions, because this ignorance is the root of all delusions. Just as there are some medicines that are regarded as universal remedies for all diseases, so there is one remedy for all our delusions. This panacea is the wisdom realizing selflessness, or sometimes we can say the wisdom realizing emptiness. In Sutra on the 10 Grounds, Buddha says, so these are Buddha words, whatever faults exist in this world all arise from self-grasping. If we are free from this conception of self, there are no faults. Whatever whatever faults exist in this world all arise from self-grasping. If we are free from this conception of self, there are no faults. So, this evening we're looking at ultimate refuge. So in general, when we experience problems, what this whole course has been about is learn to use your problem as a reminder to go for refuge. So in general, we say that we go for refuge to three things: Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Of these three, Dharma, which means the teachings of Buddha, or in particular, the experience of the teachings of Buddha, the experience you have in your heart, is the actual refuge. That it's when you have some Dharma in your heart, some inner peace, some compassion, some love, when you have a peaceful, positive mind functioning, you're protected from suffering. That's the real protection from suffering. Buddha means Buddha, the enlightened being, the enlightened mind. We need Buddha to help us get Dharma, because Buddha is the teacher, but primarily through blessings. When you learn how to connect to a Buddha, you learn how to connect to blessings, inspiration. This, by the way, is going to be like the main topic of the Northeast Dharma celebration, which starts tomorrow. Tomorrow. So you can tune in. It's all being streamed from the temple. So again, Santin will be giving the introduction tomorrow night. I'm going to give the empowerment of Buddha Shakyamuni on Saturday morning. And then I'm going to give 3 talks on how to improve the quality of our meditation. Kadam Kao will be leading some meditations. And in particular, in the empowerment, we're going to be looking precisely at that relationship between the teachings on emptiness and Buddha. Because that's the amazing thing. Buddha taught emptiness. And to be honest, nobody else did. You can't find the teaching on emptiness anywhere else. Buddha's teachings are astounding. Which is why it is that more than 2,500 years after Buddha taught, his teachings are trending. Do you know what I mean? Like they're like modern. How is that possible? And they're so unbelievably insightful now. People talking about quantum physics and things like that. And it's like, yeah, Buddha was talking about how there's no observed without an observer 2,500 years ago. But he wasn't just talking about it in a kind of distanced way that's like intriguing and interesting. No, he was talking about these most profound elucidations, expressions of reality, so as to help you achieve the fulfillment of your wishes. Happiness, freedom, how to let go of your depression, how to let go of your frustration, how to let go of your trauma, how to let go. Because it's all hinged upon the misapprehension of reality that is self-grasping ignorance. Because it is important, in truth, if you're going to really go for refuge to the Dharma, if you're really going to try to take the Dharma to heart, to have faith in Buddha, to be willing to go with Buddha, so to speak, on a journey deep into your own mind, deep into the nature of reality. And if you don't have faith, you won't do it. You won't do it in an experiential way. Like you might do it in an intellectual way. Like, oh yeah, it's very interesting, this emptiness stuff. But you know what I mean? Like where it's not touching your heart because you're doing it in such a way as to keep your ego intact. Maybe even worse, to enhance your ego with a little bit of intellectual pride. Oh, let me tell you about emptiness. Which is it's all very dangerous actually, because you're putting extra layers on your misapprehended self with that kind of deluded pride. No, Buddha's amazing. He's taking us into a journey. And the third object of refuge is the Sangha, the community of practitioners, past and present, 2,500 years, right? Generation upon generation of practitioners who have illustrated the validity of the teachings through their own experience, a lineage of transmission, of incredible transmissions of wisdom and compassion and love down through the ages, showing you that it works, so that you are willing to venture out on that journey by going for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That's why we need all three. But within those three, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the actual refuge is the Dharma, and within the Dharma, the actual refuge, the final refuge, the ultimate refuge is the wisdom realizing emptiness. That's what we're finally going for refuge in. You know, we divide Buddha's teachings into two. We say the method teachings and the wisdom teachings. The method teachings are the teachings on love and kindness and compassion and karma and so forth. And then the wisdom teachings are the teachings on emptiness. And we say all the method teachings, everything else, is a support. It's a support for that which will actually liberate you. Like Buddha gives the example of a axe cutting down the trunk of self-grasping ignorance. Cutting down the trunk of self-grasping ignorance. It's the axe that's actually going to sever through the trunk. That's the wisdom realizing emptiness. All the other teachings are the arm and the body and so forth. You need compassion, you need love, you need renunciation, you need refuge. You need to build up the strong body that will be able to hold the wisdom realizing emptiness, motivated to do it, and so on. But finally, if you want to actually protect yourself from suffering, and if you want to actually be able to protect others from suffering, it's really clear what we need. Wisdom realizing emptiness. That's the one. We need to realize that that self that we normally perceive, because we're perceiving it all the time, by the way, not just when you have a problem, you have an immediate suffering. That's when it becomes like super manifest and you can easily see that actually it's a bit crazy if you take the time to look at it. But we're actually grasping at a self that feels separate from others all the time and cherishing it. And so therefore there's grasping, some self-cherishing, and if we're being honest, some degree of desirous attachment going on all the time. We're always wanting something because we're always feeling a little bit separate and out of it all the time. But then when somebody comes along and says, I don't like you, or criticizes you, or disappoints you in some way, then you get a strong sense of self. Cherish that very strongly. So just imagine if you were to study those teachings on emptiness, begin to get some intellectual insight into them, and then begin to meditate on them. You have to do that. You get the intellectual understanding, that's a good step. But the whole purpose of the intellectual understanding is just to get an image of emptiness, which is basically your level of insight into emptiness. And then you need to begin to meditate on that. And the point of meditation is that what that means is that you hold your experience of emptiness in meditation for longer and longer periods of time until you begin eventually to see it. It becomes more and more clear, more and more razor sharp. You begin to actually recognize. And then at that point, at some point, right, you will begin to understand, not just intellectually, but viscerally, that painful self that you're so believing in and cherishing doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. The self that you cherish, always thinking I, as Geshe Kelsing puts it. That's, we're always thinking I, aren't we? I want this, I want that, I. We're always relating to a self, and that self doesn't exist. So this gets a little freaky, I know. It's like, what? Doesn't exist? So this is also why we need to study. And, why it's going to be amazing. By the way, it doesn't start this Sunday, because this Sunday is part of the Northeast Dharma celebration. So there's no normal class on Sunday, because I'm going to be, or at least my voice will be appearing from the recording at the temple. So next, it's the following Sunday. We'll be starting the chapter on emptiness, just giving us the opportunity to really spend some time thinking deeply about this. But just imagine, like, for example, all of us, to a greater or lesser extent, will all have a few old selves that we drag around with us. Do you know what I mean? Like, some painful thing from childhood, or when you were a teenager or something, like some painful experiences. And every now and then we'll encounter something that will kind of trigger that, like reflect that. And then suddenly there's this old insecurity that appears in your mind, or old feelings of rejection, or old feelings of not being good enough or unloved, or, whatever it may be. We carry these things around with us. We don't feel it all the time, right? Which is indicative. The self is changing all the time. But when those painful selves appear, boom, we believe it and we cherish it. And there are some selves that we've had the habit of identifying with for a substantial period of our life. So imagine eventually recognizing that the self that you normally perceive, the self that you cherish, that painful self, actually doesn't exist. When I say it doesn't exist, what I mean is it doesn't exist in the way in which you think it exists. You exist. Buddha's not saying that you don't exist. Let's just get that straight. I exist. You exist. The microphone exists. The center exists. New York City exists. The United States exists. This book exists. Everything that exists, exists. You can quote me on that. You'll never want to, but you can. But all the things that we normally see do not exist. Because unfortunately, whatever appears to our mind at the moment appears to be independent of our mind, outside the mind. Like I mentioned with respect to me, each one of you is actually looking at your version of me, correct? Which basically means you're looking at your projection of me. So I'm not existing outside of your mind for you. For you, I'm only existing relative to your mind. But due to ignorance, we perceive me, in this case, to be outside of your mind, independent of your mind. That version of me, which is the one you're perceiving, doesn't exist. The Kata Morton that you normally perceive doesn't exist. I do exist, but the one that you're perceiving doesn't exist. And that's true of everything. New York City exists, just not the one that we perceive, because we perceive an independently existent New York City. It doesn't exist. Is this good news or bad news? It's literally ever here, ever. Like literally. It's the best news. Like Geshe Kelsang has said, you can see, Geshe Kelsang has had a lot to say during his time here. But he has said on several occasions, the meaning of meeting him, the meaning of meeting Geshe Kelsang, doesn't mean physically meeting, but like meeting through his books or whatever, through his representatives and so on, is to realize emptiness, is to realize that the things you normally see do not exist. That's his main message, right? Everything else is in support of that message. That's what he feels he's appeared in the modern world to say. The things you normally see do not exist. Because that is our ultimate refuge. So if we go back to that example, that painful self that you've been relating to for however long in your life, that has kind of crippled you, held you back, kept you trapped, kept you unable to get away from certain insecurities and certain things that happened in the past that traumatized you. I mean, some people, they will literally go through their whole life and they won't be able to escape certain things that happened in the past. They'll never feel internally open and free and just be present in an open way because of that burden that they're carrying around. So imagine recognizing that painful self that you feel has imprisoned you doesn't exist. You're free. You're actually free. It's a bit like, somebody throws you in a cell, prison cell, and they slam the door shut. And for the next period of time, you're just in there, feeling miserable, feeling trapped. And then one day, instead of just kind of going up to the what do you call it, the bars, grasping at the bars and kind of just like staring forlornly out, going, I wish I was free. One day you kind of lean on it and suddenly discover, oh, the door is open. In fact, it was always open. Okay, so there'll be a moment of feeling like, I wish I discovered that earlier. But the point is, you're then free. You're free. And in some sense, the past doesn't matter anymore. You're free. And that's really what the teaching on emptiness means. Emptiness, the reason we use that word, emptiness, is because we're saying that things are empty of existing in the way in which we think they exist. We think things are full of independent existence. But in reality, they're empty of independent existence. So that painful self that we're grasping at, that feels so real, is actually empty of being real. Yay. Nothing to cherish, nothing to feel hurt about, nothing to feel attached on the basis of, gone. The great Jetson Kappa, the founder of the New Kadampa lineage 600 years ago, he described that when he realized emptiness, he said he experienced such an extraordinary degree of relaxation. Like the kind of relaxation that we can't quite conceive of at this point in time. Not just like a good massage, like a cosmic relaxation. Because we can have a good massage and then start getting tense a few minutes later. But when the very basis of tension is gone in your mind at the deepest level, then you realize, oh, I can be entirely free from anger, jealousy, greed, attachment, and so on. Forever, because it has no basis in reality. I can become a liberated person who's just pervaded by peace and happiness and joy. And eventually, through continually meditating, full enlightenment. Yeah, that's the way to do it. So I can explain all that, but it would take too long now, which is why we're going to study the chapter. But the key point here is just to understand that, if I want to have better relationships, I definitely need to practice patient acceptance, which Buddha has taught. I need to practice cherishing love. If I want to overcome my self-centered mind, I need to train in generosity and giving. I need to train in compassion, and so on. If I want to create more happiness in my life, I need to learn about karma and live in accordance with the law of karma, and so on, as we'll start studying next week. But if I want to be completely free from suffering, realize emptiness. And we can do it. We've got everything we need. In fact, one of the incredible kindnesses of Venerable Geshe Kelsang is that he has explained emptiness in just very, very clear and practical ways. Because there are definitely like some traditional expositions on emptiness that you could read and get very confused about because they can come across as very sort of technical and intellectual. And Geshe was never interested in that. He basically felt that the way in which they studied Buddhist practice within the Tibetan monasteries that he grew up in was actually kind of impractical. It had become a bit institutionalized. You know, they were really into their classifications and things like that. Whereas what Geshe Kelsang wanted to teach, and this is what he received from his own teacher, was the Lam Rim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, compassion, love, wisdom. He wanted, and he said that when he arrived in the West, he discovered that people in the West actually didn't have that much patience for those kind of like definitions and divisions and kind of intellectual approach. Most people in the modern world, you know, we've got so many problems that we're working on. We don't want to get too confused by intellectual stuff. We just want to know how to solve our problems. And we just want the Buddhist teachings to help us solve our problems. And Geshe thought that's fantastic. He actually said this is a great of modern people, because then he could really focus on just teaching the Dharma in a super practical way. And from that point of view, and this is maybe initially hard to understand, but you'll understand later if you spend a bit of time looking at how Geshe has, you know, just very subtly presented the teachings on emptiness in a bit of a different way than they are traditionally presented, to just highlight the practical experience. It's an incredible kindness. He's made emptiness easy. So please don't think it's difficult. It's not difficult. It's just unfamiliar. Through familiarity, you will begin to, I think I can say this, you'll begin to love it. Like initially the teachings on emptiness can be like, wow, that's really intriguing. Wow, that's really fascinating. But at some point you're going to realize it's wonderful. Like it's literally wonderful. For example, you know, and we can meditate on this in a moment, but we're caught up in that painful self. And then you realize there is no painful self other than what I'm projecting and believing. But if I recognize it's just my projection and I really don't need to keep projecting it because it's not real, then you can let go of it. So in the moment that you let go of that projected limited self, what are you free to do? You're free to be whatever you want to be. And it turns out that nobody wants to be unhappy. Not really. Sometimes we're so used to being unhappy, we can't imagine not being unhappy. But once you're given the freedom to just do something that authentically reflects your heart, you'll just naturally be loving, kind, compassionate, joyful, expansive, flexible, open-hearted, generous, beneficial. That's what the teachings on emptiness open us up to. They open us up to experiencing the world in an unbelievably beautiful way, to experience each other in an unbelievably beautiful way. Like, for example, you know, just as we grasp at ourselves in a limited way, we grasp at others in a limited way, don't we? There are certain people, you just hear their name and you're immediately like, I know them. They're just so such and such, you know, however you see them in your mind. In many cases, we don't even know them. You know, it's like some person we've seen on TV or something like that, or read about, you know, in a gossip column or something, you know, we're like, we don't even know them, but we feel like we do. We feel like we have our very limited version, and we can spend a lot of time just being negative and just creating actually negativity for ourselves in the process. When you realize emptiness, you then realize the world is how you project it to be. It's on you. I could see everyone in a limited negative way, but what am I going to get out of that? A bunch of limited negative feelings. I'm just creating the cause to encounter more and more limited negative people from a limited negative perspective, right? We just get caught in that cycle. But if I realize, wait a moment, no one is inherently limited. Everyone has Buddha nature. Everyone is actually limitless. And we start seeing that in each other. Well, what's that going to create? Joyful minds, loving minds, compassionate minds, and of course, actions, how you're going to speak, how you're going to behave. You're going to create that kind of karma. Before you know it, you're relating to the possibility of changing this world. Like, I think in general, right now, there's a lot of despair in our society. Did you hear that statistic I heard the other day of, I'm not sure how they measure this, but they were saying that 25% of young people between, I think, was it 15 and 25 or 18 and 25, have contemplated suicide in the last 5 months. 25%. That's despair, isn't it? That's saying that there's despair in our society. That people look at the world, they look at climate change, they look at the amount of tribalization and hatred and fighting and going on, and negativity and pettiness and so forth that's going on in our society. And they can't envision a different type of world, because the world appears in that way to their mind. Self-grasping ignorance grasps at it and believes it, and now you feel stuck, don't you? But what's actually making you feel stuck is not the world, because the world that you normally see doesn't exist. It's your self-grasping ignorance. That's always the root delusion. It's always the root problem, which means the ultimate refuge, the ultimate protection, is always wisdom realizing emptiness. When you start realizing, it's not that you have to, eventually you're going to get to an amazing realization, but even just a little bit, even just a few drops of emptiness, so to speak, wisdom into your mind will begin to make things more possible, open, fluid, dynamic. So that's our ultimate refuge. That's where we're traveling to. That's where we're going. So let's spend a little bit of time now, in conclusion, in meditation. So once again, just take a moment to focus on your breathing, allowing your heart to connect to a peaceful mind again. If there's already a good feeling in your heart from listening to the teachings, then you can just go straight to that good feeling and gently abide there, letting it fill your heart. So allow yourself to abide with that peaceful mind, reminding yourself that this experience of peace is indicating your potential for a vast peace, a vast joy and freedom. You can recognize I have the potential for real, pervasive peace and happiness. How wonderful. Rejoice in that. And then from this perspective, we can once again just bring to mind some self, some version of ourself that perhaps we feel stuck in all too often. Is there a painful version of yourself that you find yourself trapped in from time to time? Just bring it to mind now, observing it from this peaceful vantage point. And as you observe that self, you can ask yourself, is this painful self inside my mind or outside of my mind? If it's inside my mind, then what is it? Then it's just an idea, isn't it? It's just a thought. I'm relating to that self as if it were really there, as if it were more than just an idea, more than just an image. But that self, the one that's more than just an image, can't be found. There's no fixed, painful self that I have to be. There's just an idea, which means I can begin to let go of that idea, which means my actual nature is freedom. So just gently contemplate this. If you have an insight into it, a feeling for it, abide with that. Or just think how wonderful if I could come to understand this and really let go of those self-limiting views. experience freedom. So how amazing that such teachings exist and that the method to realize them exists. This is the extraordinary kindness of Buddha Shakyamuni. So although we ourselves may not be clear when it comes to emptiness, just by attending, by listening, by contemplating, we have created powerful causes to be able to realize emptiness in the future. So therefore we should rejoice and dedicate all this amazing, fortunate karma to our own and others' realization of the true nature of things, to our own and others' liberation and enlightenment, and to the happiness and freedom and peace of all beings everywhere. Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, next week we will be starting the next meditation in this series with a teaching on karma. So first there'll be an introductory teaching, which we're doing our best to advertise quite widely. Perhaps I think this is a very important topic for what people are experiencing at the moment, in particular to understand the fluidity of karma, just how empowering those teachings are for helping us to begin to create the type of life we want. So if you know of people who you think might receive some benefit from this, in other words, if you know anybody, then maybe let them know. I also mentioned already the Northeast Dharma celebration that's happening this weekend, so you can still go online. There's probably a link on our website, isn't there? There's a link on our website that will take you to it's for the Northeast, so at all the centers in the Northeast gathering together, so to speak, virtually. You know, we used to all obviously go to the temple, but that's not happening this year. And we're actually, it's post Labor Day now. We're sort of launching a bunch of different series. So the series on ultimate bodhicitta on emptiness will be starting then the following Sunday. And this Monday, we're starting a series called The Bliss of Tantra. So we're going to be exploring again over a period of time, so we can go a little bit in greater depth. We're going to be looking at Buddha's tantric teachings, which he taught the sutra teachings. That's what we were just explaining right now. These all come from Buddha's sutra teachings, which were his public discourses. And then the tantric teachings basically are teachings that kind of complement the sutra teachings and approach the process of transforming the mind from a different perspective, very imaginative, colorful, very much about taking daily life experiences and then transforming them into a very kind of peaceful, imaginative path, blissful, imaginative path to enlightenment. It's in the tantric teachings that he talked with Kiteshvara and Manjushri and so forth. So again, I thought we would take some time to explore some of that for those of you who have some wish. So that's going to be happening on the Monday evenings. Great. Thank you very much. See you later.